For over 15 years, Teutul Jr. stayed quiet. No tell-all interviews, no public attacks, no spilling the details of what really happened inside the world's most famous custom bike shop. But now, that silence is over, and what he's saying, it's not the feel-good reunion fans were hoping for. From explosive fights caught on camera to lawsuits that nearly tore the company apart, to a truth about his father that never made it to TV, Teutul Jr. is ready to reveal the parts of American Chopper you were never supposed to hear. And once you hear it, you'll never look at the Teutul family the same way again. Childhood in the workshop. While most kids in the mid-80s were busy riding bikes, watching Saturday morning cartoons, or battling it out on Nintendo, Teutul Jr. childhood looked nothing like that. For him, playtime meant heat, noise, and the smell of burning steel. His earliest memories weren't of playgrounds or birthday parties. They were of shop floors littered with metal shavings, the rhythmic pounding of hammers, and the sparks of a welding torch cutting through the dark. At just 12 years old, while other kids were lounging at the beach or skateboarding with friends, Teutul Jr. was sweeping the floors at Orange County Iron Works, the family's steel fabrication business. He ran tools to grown men with weathered hands and decades of experience, learning to read their expressions before they even said a word. But his fascination with metal started even earlier. When his dad took him to job sites, Teutul Jr. would quietly collect scrap pieces of steel like they were rare treasures. To him, they weren't junk, they were the raw materials for imagination. At home, he'd arrange them into little sculptures, testing how shapes fit together, dreaming up designs that had no practical use, but looked right. That early exposure planted something deep in him, a way of seeing beyond what was in front of him. By 14, he wasn't just holding tools. He was welding with a precision that made even the seasoned guys stop and watch. They might not have said it out loud, but they respected him. Still, growing up in his father's shop wasn't all admiration and pats on the back. Teutul Sr. had a reputation for being intense, and he pushed his son harder than anyone else. Mistakes were never swept under the rug. They were called out, sometimes loudly, and often in front of everyone. Some thought it was unfair, but Sr. believed it would forge his son into something stronger. What no one realized at the time was that this relentless environment would shape more than Teutul Jr. It would shape the way he thought, the way he worked, and eventually, the way he fought back. But before the fights came, there was a moment, a rare one, that hinted at the respect buried deep between father and son. Life under Sr.'s shadow. From the outside, it looked like the perfect apprenticeship, father and son, side by side, building the kind of steelwork that could outlast a lifetime. But inside the shop, the dynamic was far from balanced. Teutul Sr. wasn't the type to hand out praise easily, or at all. His voice carried across the entire floor, and when it was aimed at you, everyone heard it. For Teutul Jr., that was almost a daily experience. If a measurement was off, if a weld didn't look perfect, if a tool wasn't exactly where it was supposed to be, he'd get called out on the spot, no matter who was watching. And the thing was, Junior's mistakes were often smaller than the ones made by other workers. But Sr. was harder on him than anyone else, almost like he had something to prove. Some thought it was favoritism in reverse, making sure no one could accuse him of going easy on his own son. Others thought it was just his way of testing him, breaking him down to build him up. The constant pressure could have driven a lot of young guys out, but Junior stayed, and slowly, a mutual respect started to take root, though neither of them would say it out loud. One summer, while working on a simple railing job, Junior decided to redesign the structure completely. He made it stronger, cleaner, and more elegant, adding a level of detail the shop had never bothered with before. When he showed it to his father, Sr. barely looked at it before dismissing the change. Too much time, he grunted, moving on to the next task. But a few days later, without a word, Sr. approved the new design and had it installed. It was a silent acknowledgement, but to Junior, it meant more than any compliment could. Still, those moments of quiet respect were rare. Most of the time, it was a constant tug of war, old-school brute strength versus Junior's precision and creativity. And with both men as stubborn as steel, it was only a matter of time before the heat in the shop wasn't just coming from the welding torches, but before the sparks of their personalities could ignite into full-blown conflict. Junior made a choice that would put him on an entirely different track from most kids his age. Vocational school to leadership. While most high school students were memorizing formulas for math tests or struggling through essays they'd forget in a week, Paul Jr. was already chasing a different kind of education, one that smelled like burnt steel and echoed with the hum of welding torches. He joined a vocational program that let him split his day between the classroom and the shop floor. The first half of the day was about theory, learning to read blueprints, understanding the stress points in steel, and memorizing welding techniques. The second half was pure hands-on work, where every cut and every weld was a test of patience and precision. It didn't take long for his instructors to notice he wasn't just another student ticking boxes. They said he had a rare gift, like he could see how metal wanted to move before even touching it. While others struggled to fix mistakes, Junior seemed to avoid them entirely, bending the material to his will as if it was part instinct, part art. After school, he didn't just go home. He stayed late, practicing every technique until it became muscle memory. He wasn't chasing grades, he was chasing mastery. And by the time he graduated, he wasn't just a kid who knew how to weld. He was a fabricator who could hold his own against seasoned pros. When he returned to Orange County Iron Works full-time, the change was obvious. The kid sweeping floors was gone. In his place was a craftsman who spoke the language of the trade fluently and could back it up with results. At just 19, he was put in charge of the railing division, a department that brought in nearly half of the company's income. And this wasn't some cushy family perk. The role came with pressure. His designs added a modern edge to the company's work, and customers started asking for him by name, willing to pay more and wait longer just to get something crafted by Paulie. Managing the division also meant leading a crew of older, more experienced men. Some of them war veterans, all of them skeptical of being told what to do by a teenager. But over time, even the toughest doubters came around, admitting he knew exactly what he was doing. He had earned their respect, but deep down, Junior still felt like something was missing. Railings were solid, dependable, but they didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't excite him. And that's when he started sketching, quietly, secretly, the designs that would change his life forever. The spark for motorcycles. By his early 20s, Paul Jr. had built a reputation in the steel world that most craftsmen twice his age would envy. He was designing and leading projects that kept the family business thriving. But as steady and successful as it was, something inside him was restless. Railings, stairs, and structural steel paid the bills, but they didn't make his pulse race. There was no roar, no chrome, no thrill. He wanted to build something that moved, something that felt alive. Late at night, after finishing a day's work at Orange County Iron Works, he'd pull out a battered old notebook and start sketching motorcycles. These weren't crude doodles, they were intricate designs, dripping with curves, symmetry, and personality. Every line had a purpose. Every part had to flow into the next. Around the same time, fate stepped in. His father, who had been out of the motorcycle game for years, started tinkering with bikes again, at first just as a hobby. One day, he asked Junior to help with a small project, nothing serious. But when Junior showed him the sketches he'd been working on, the reaction was instant. Senior was stunned. These weren't just technical drawings, they were art. And in that moment, something shifted. The old-school iron worker who valued muscle over finesse saw, maybe for the first time, just how much raw, creative talent his son had. "Let's build bikes," Senior said. Not for fun, for real. It was a leap of faith for both of them. They scraped together about $175,000 from the ironworks business, cleared out a cold basement, and stocked it with basic tools. That basement became the birthplace of Orange County choppers. But from the very beginning, the split between them wasn't even. Senior kept 80% ownership. Junior got 20%. At the time, it didn't matter. They weren't thinking about contracts or percentages. They were thinking about possibility. Their first big project, True Blue, took 4 long months of late nights, endless welding, and layer after layer of deep blue paint with white flames. When they rolled it into Daytona Bike Week in 1999, jaws dropped. No one believed it had come from a basement shop in upstate New York. Suddenly, they weren't nobodies anymore. But recognition didn't mean comfort. The early days were brutal. In 2000, they were still crammed into a freezing workshop. Tools broke. Suppliers demanded cash up front. Money ran out. Junior often worked 18-hour days, grabbing sleep on a shop couch just to keep deadlines alive. And through all of that, the tension between father and son simmered. Big arguments would erupt over design choices or missed deadlines, and they weren't for show. This was survival. Then, in 2002, a single phone call would take their little basement shop from struggling to world famous. Almost overnight, struggling for survival. By 2002, Orange County Choppers had a handful of eye-catching bikes under its belt, but they were still operating like underdogs. The shop was small, cold, and cramped. So cramped that moving a frame from one workbench to another meant shifting half the room just to make space. Tools were breaking faster than they could be replaced. Suppliers didn't hand out credit, they wanted cash up front. It was a grind. Every bike they sold barely covered the cost of the materials, let alone the hours of labor poured into it. But quitting wasn't in their vocabulary. For Junior, the long nights and frozen mornings weren't just about chasing a paycheck. They were about chasing the rush that came from creating something one of a kind. He was sleeping on the shop's beat-up couch more than in his own bed. 18-hour days became normal. He and Senior would clash constantly, sometimes over deadlines, sometimes over design, sometimes over nothing at all. But even when they weren't speaking, they kept building, because both knew, deep down, that what they had was special. Then came the phone call. Craig Peligian, a TV producer, had spotted one of their custom bikes in a magazine feature. He was scouting for a new reality series about motorcycles and wanted to film at OC Choppers. Senior wasn't impressed. In fact, when he picked up the phone, his first words were, "What the hell do you want?" The producer pitched a show about restoring junkyard bikes. Senior shut it down immediately. "We don't restore, we build from scratch." The deal almost died right there, until weeks later, the producer came back with a different angle. Film everything. The builds, the blow-ups, the chaos. Show the real relationship between father and son, unfiltered. Junior hated the idea. He could see the cameras changing the shop's dynamic before they even arrived. He even wrote his dad a 5-page letter warning, "They'll make us look like fools." The contract wasn't exactly a sweet deal either. $5,000 per episode, endless camera retakes, blinding lights that made welding harder. At one point, producers even suggested calling the show Family Friction. But in the end, they needed the money. They signed, and on March 31st, 2003, American Chopper premiered. 3 episodes in, their lives would never be the same again. The rise of American Chopper. When American Chopper premiered on March 31st, 2003, nobody, not the producers, not the Teutuls, not even the most optimistic fan, could have predicted what was about to happen. By the 3rd episode, the show had exploded. Over 3 million people were tuning in every week. Overnight, the tiny basement-born shop became a tourist destination. Strangers would show up just to peek inside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the crew hammering away at a custom build. For many viewers, it wasn't Paul Shah or the father-son screaming matches that kept them coming back. It was Paul Jr. His work, his quiet focus, the way he could take raw metal and, without a single wasted movement, turn it into something beautiful. One of the most requested clips in the show's history was nothing more than Junior, alone, shaping a gas tank in complete silence. No music, no talking, just the steady rhythm of his craft. The Paulie effect was real. Welding schools across the country reported a spike in enrollment. Kids who had never touched a welder before suddenly wanted to be fabricators. In their eyes, Junior wasn't just a guy on TV, he was proof that art and engineering could live in the same set of hands. But the designs that really put OC Choppers on the map were the big statements. Machines that weren't just bikes, they were centerpieces. None more so than the Black Widow. Its spiderweb gas tank, custom wheels, and 167 hours of painstaking craftsmanship turned it into a rolling sculpture. When they unveiled it in New York, 15,000 people packed in just to see it. Security had to hold the crowd back. Within months, model kits, t-shirts, and posters flooded the market. Over 280,000 model kits sold in just 6 months. OC Choppers had gone from a small-town shop to a global brand. And yet, for all the fame, money, and merchandise, Junior's heart was still in the builds that meant something. The bike that would change him forever was already taking shape, and it would be built from the ashes of one of America's darkest days. Tribute bikes and emotional high points. By the summer of 2003, Paul Jr. had already proven he could design bikes that would stop a crowd cold. But his next project wasn't about impressing fans or selling merchandise. It was about honoring heroes. The build was called the Firebike, and it was dedicated to the 343 firefighters who lost their lives on September 11, 2001. This wasn't just another custom job. Every part of the design had to carry meaning. Every curve, every weld, every detail needed to tell a story. One of the most powerful pieces was a jagged section of steel pulled directly from the wreckage of the World Trade Center. That piece could have been handed off to another welder, but Paul Jr. insisted on doing it himself. Carefully, he welded it to a diamond plate bracket he had crafted specifically for this bike. It was the final touch, and it hit with more weight than any engine or frame ever could. The project wasn't without its challenges. The bike's design was so ambitious that Jr. had to completely re-engineer the frame. It needed to carry 343 hand-painted emblems, each one representing a fallen firefighter. That kind of load, both literal and emotional, required precision and strength in equal measure. When the Firebike was unveiled in June 2003, it wasn't just bikers in the audience. Families, first responders, and people who had lived through the attacks came to see it. Many left in tears. The New York Fire Department treated the bike like one of their own. When it was involved in an accident the following year, they didn't send a tow truck. They personally recovered it, piece by piece, like they were honoring a fallen comrade. Years later, it still sat in the OC Choppers Museum, having been displayed at more than 240 events. Visitors left notes, photos, and personal tributes beside it, proof that sometimes a machine can carry far more than an engine. In 2011, Paul Jr. was asked to revisit that pain and pride for another project. Daniel R. Tishman, a board member for the 9/11's memorial, approached him to build something unforgettable. He didn't make one bike, he made two. One stayed as a permanent tribute. The other was raffled to raise money for the memorial. On January 20, 2011, when the cover came off, the reaction was overwhelming. It wasn't just bikers who showed up. Politicians, families, and survivors stood together as the polished chrome reflected the weight of history. People cried openly. Even major outlets like the Huffington Post ran features on it, ensuring the tribute reached people who would never see it in person. But while the public saw a man capable of building some of the most emotionally powerful motorcycles in the world, behind the shop doors, Jr. was quietly transforming, not just as an artist, but as an innovator. And his next leap forward wouldn't just change OC Choppers. It would change custom bike building forever. Innovation and technical genius. By the time American Chopper was in full swing, most fans saw Paul Jr. as the design guy, the one with the eye for perfect lines and jaw-dropping paint schemes. But what the cameras didn't always show was just how far his technical mind was pushing the industry forward. In 2012, he quietly introduced a game-changing method into the custom motorcycle world: T-spline modeling. This wasn't just another design tweak, it fundamentally sped up the creative process. Shapes that used to take more than 40 hours to form by hand could now be completed in under 15. It meant smoother curves, cleaner transitions, and more freedom to experiment without losing weeks in fabrication time. The innovation really shined when he teamed up with Autodesk to build an electric bike. Without T-splines, the bike's futuristic curves would have been a nightmare to create. Soon, other shops started using the same technique, often without realizing where it came from, and rarely giving credit to the man who pioneered it in the custom scene. Then, in 2015, Paul Jr. shocked even his own crew. He unveiled a new system for building motorcycle frames that made them significantly lighter without sacrificing strength. It was the kind of advancement that could have stayed a closely guarded trade secret, but he shared it with his team, knowing it would raise the quality of every build they touched. And he wasn't stopping there. Around the same time, he taught himself G-code, the programming language used to control CNC machines. Before, he would hand off his designs to machinists to cut and shape parts. Now, he could run the machines himself, fine-tuning every cut, every groove, down to fractions of a millimeter. He was no longer just an artist handing over blueprints. He was a designer, engineer, and machinist rolled into one. It gave him complete control over his vision from the first sketch to the final bolt. But while the bikes were evolving, the shop's atmosphere was not. In fact, Tensions inside Orange County choppers were tightening like a bolt about to snap, and it wasn't the bikes causing the pressure, it was the two men at the center of it all. Innovation wasn't the problem. Control was. Cracks in the foundation. On the surface, Orange County Choppers was living the dream: big contracts, worldwide recognition, a massive new facility, and bikes that were selling faster than they could be built. But inside the shop, something was shifting. The change began quietly in 2007, when Paul Sr. gave Jr. a 20% ownership stake in the company. On paper, it looked like a smart, fair arrangement. Sr. would run the business side, Jr. would lead the creative, but in reality, Sr. kept full control. Every major decision, every hire, every contract still went through him. At first, it worked. But as Jr.'s designs became the centerpiece of the brand, grabbing magazine covers, dominating bike shows, and pulling in merch sales, the balance started to tilt. Customers and fans weren't praising Sr.'s old-school craftsmanship anymore. They were talking about Jr.'s style, Jr.'s ideas, Jr.'s bikes. That didn't sit well with a man who had built OC choppers from nothing. The more attention Jr. got, the tighter Sr.'s grip became. It wasn't just business, it was personal. Sr.'s rules were non-negotiable, and Jr.'s laid-back, creative process clashed hard with that rigidity. If Jr. came in late, it wasn't just a point of frustration, it lit a fuse. And every time he pushed back, that fuse burned shorter. By 2008, the tension had turned into a constant low-grade war. Arguments weren't occasional, they were daily. Designers were walking on eggshells. Even Mikey, the easygoing younger brother, who could make anyone laugh, looked worn down from years of playing peacemaker. One designer, Jason Pohl, famously smashed one of his own creations to pieces after a particularly brutal tirade from Sr. The shop's vibe had gone from a place of creative energy to a pressure cooker, where one wrong word could set off an explosion. And then, in September 2008, that explosion finally came. It started over something small, a late arrival, but it would end with a chair flying across the room, and the Teutul family changed forever. The chair-throwing explosion. September 2008. On paper, it should have been just another hectic day in the shop. Bikes to finish, deadlines looming, cameras rolling. But the tension between father and son had been building for months, maybe years, and it only needed the smallest spark to set it off. That spark came when Paul Jr. showed up late. Again. For most employees, it would have been a warning, maybe a lecture. The moment Jr. walked in, the words started flying, loud, sharp, and cutting. The cameras caught some of it, but what they didn't capture was the years of frustration behind every word. Jr. tried to push back, pointing out that he always got the job done, that his late starts didn't mean missed deadlines. But Sr. wasn't hearing it. He saw it as disrespect, as disobedience, as a challenge to his authority in his shop. The argument escalated fast. Voices rose. Faces reddened. Crew members froze, unsure whether to step in or get out of the way. Then it happened. Fed up beyond reason, Jr. grabbed a chair and hurled it across the office. It crashed hard, followed by a trash can kicked over in rage. He slammed a door so hard it rattled the windows. And then he was gone, storming out into the parking lot, the shouting echoing behind him. Sr. chased after him, but not to calm him down. His words were final. "You're fired." That moment, the chair throw, the firing, became one of the most infamous scenes in American chopper history. Years later, it would be replayed in memes and GIFs, stripped of its context. But at the time, it was no joke. It was the complete collapse of whatever was left of their working relationship. In the days that followed, the shop felt like a ghost town. Some crew members quietly sided with Jr. Others stayed silent, afraid of Sr.'s wrath. Customers whispered about whether the magic was gone now that the designer behind OC's most famous builds wasn't there. Even the network panicked. TLC warned Jr. that walking off the show could be a breach of contract. For a short time, he came back as a contractor, just to keep things legally clean. But by April 2009, it was over. He was gone for good, or at least, that's what everyone thought until Sr. decided to take the fight from the shop floor to the courtroom. Courtroom War. When Paul Jr. walked away from Orange County Choppers in 2009, most people figured that was the end of it. He'd start his own thing. Sr. would keep the family empire, and they'd go their separate ways. But that's not how Paul Sr. saw it. In his mind, Jr.'s 20% stake in the company was a loose bolt that needed tightening, or in this case, removing entirely. Sr. wanted him out, completely and permanently, and he was ready to use the courts to make it happen. He moved to buy Jr.'s shares for $500,000, claiming the company's operating agreement gave him that right. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he filed another lawsuit demanding $1 million in damages. In a move that baffled even people close to the business, he actually made his own company, Orange County Choppers, a co-defendant in the case, putting it on both sides of the legal fight. At the heart of it all was one poorly written clause in their contract. It said Sr. could buy out Jr.'s shares at fair market value, but never defined exactly how that value should be determined. That vague sentence was about to turn into a legal landmine. When the case hit the New York Supreme Court in 2010, the first ruling went in Sr.'s favor. The judge said the buyout clause was enforceable and ordered an outside appraiser to set the value of the shares. For a moment, it looked like Jr. was done. The two men sat in court together without saying a word to each other. No glances, no nods, just silence thick enough to choke on. But Jr. wasn't ready to fold. He appealed the decision, and in December 2010, everything flipped. The appellate court reversed the ruling, declaring the clause too vague to enforce. That meant Jr. got to keep his 20% stake. Sr. couldn't force him out. It wasn't just a legal win, it was a symbolic one. Against all odds, the son everyone thought had been crushed was still standing. But victory came with a catch. A one-year non-compete clause meant Jr. couldn't build motorcycles until 2010. For a man who lived and breathed bikes, it was like being benched in the middle of a championship game. So he pivoted, designing products, rebranding himself, and quietly planning his next move. And when that one-year clock finally ran out, Jr.'s comeback wouldn't just be a return to bikes, it would trigger one of the biggest defections in custom motorcycle history: Paul Jr. designs and mass exodus. When Paul Jr. one-year non-compete finally expired in April 2010, most people assumed he'd quietly set up a small shop and start fresh. But Jr. had other plans that would hit his father where it hurt most. Instead of moving across town, he set up Paul Jr. Designs right across the street from Orange County Choppers. From his office window, he could literally see the building where he'd spent most of his life, now run entirely without him. It wasn't just a new chapter, it was a declaration of independence. And then came the real shocker. One by one, some of OC's most loyal and skilled crew members walked out of Sr.'s shop and into Jr.'s. Vinny DiMartino, Sr.'s former right-hand man. Joe Poliafico, another key fabricator. Christian Nub Collard, the custom painter who'd given OC's bikes their signature look. Even Mikey, the youngest Teutul and longtime peacekeeper, chose to leave and join his brother. Before long, Cody Connolly, a former protege, made the switch too. It wasn't just a staffing change, it was a mass defection. Sr. had been left with a hollowed-out roster, and Jr. suddenly had a dream team. The drama was too good for television to resist. Discovery Channel immediately greenlit a new spin-off, American Chopper, Sr. vs. Jr. The premise was simple and brutal: father and son, running rival shops, building bikes in a weekly showdown for the cameras. Jr. wasn't thrilled about airing even more of their private feud in public, but the exposure was too big to ignore. Sr., on the other hand, leaned into it completely. The show blurred the line between reality and reality TV. Some of the tension was staged, but a lot of it was all too real. Reviewers nicknamed it Tantrum TV, and they weren't wrong. The bikes almost became secondary. Viewers tuned in for the explosions, the insults, the awkward silences between a father and son who couldn't be in the same room without a verbal fistfight. But in the middle of all that chaos, something unexpected happened, something that had nothing to do with business or lawsuits, and everything to do with a yellow jumpsuit and a chance meeting. Because while the cameras were focused on the war, Paul Jr. had just met the woman who would change the way he saw everything: love, faith, and perspective. In the middle of all the noise, the lawsuits, the rival builds, the cameras capturing every glare, Paul Jr. met someone who had nothing to do with motorcycles, but everything to do with what came next in his life: Her name was Rachel Biest, and their first meeting was straight out of a TV producer's dream. She appeared on an episode shoot wearing a bright yellow jumpsuit as the McCuff girl. It was supposed to be a quick, forgettable cameo, but for Junior, it clicked instantly. She wasn't part of the drama, didn't care about the fame, and wasn't intimidated by the Teutul name. Rachel had her own life. She ran a boutique, managed her own business, and didn't need anyone to save her. But she gave Junior something he hadn't had in years: stability. While the shop battles raged and headlines painted the Teutul family feud as entertainment, Rachel became the calm in his storm. Their relationship grew quickly, and on August 20, 2010, they were married in a beautiful ceremony that was equal parts grand and personal. There was even a 6-tier cake from TLC's Cake Boss. But there was also one empty chair everyone noticed. He had been invited, but the business and lawsuits were still too fresh. For Junior, the absence cut deep. Even surrounded by friends, family, and cameras, it was impossible to ignore that his father wasn't there on the biggest day of his life. That empty chair became a symbol, not just of their fractured relationship, but of how much had been lost along the way. Years later, another life-changing moment would give Junior a different perspective. After nearly 2 years of struggling to conceive, he and Rachel finally got the news they'd been hoping for. Rachel was pregnant, and in February 2015, their son Hudson was born. Holding his son for the first time shifted something in Junior. For years, he had seen his father as an adversary, but now, as a father himself, he began to understand what it meant to love and protect your child, how painful it must have been for his own dad to watch him walk away. Around the same time, Junior's faith deepened. He and Rachel attended a spiritual retreat where they made a choice that surprised even them. No intimacy until marriage. For them, it wasn't about rules, it was about building their relationship on trust and commitment. That decision became a cornerstone of their marriage and a guiding principle in how Junior approached life from then on. Through faith, marriage, and fatherhood, Paul Jr. found the courage to reflect on the past without bitterness. He started to believe that, for Hudson's sake, some kind of peace with his father was worth reaching for. But peace wouldn't come from a hug or a phone call. It would come from a moment of loss that pulled the Teutuls together, even if only briefly. Reunions that weren't. If fans were hoping for a heartwarming father-son reunion, the moments Paul Jr. and Paul Sr. found themselves in the same room again weren't it. The first crack in their silence came in December 2011, when Helen Teutul, Sr.'s mother and Junior's grandmother, passed away. For nearly 2 years, father and son hadn't exchanged a word, but that day, Junior picked up the phone. It wasn't a long call, just a few words. "She loved you very much," Junior said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss." On the other end, Senior seemed caught off guard. He admitted later that he wished it had been in person, but you could hear a shift in his voice, something between grief and regret. It wasn't closure, but it was human. The next reunion wasn't born from emotion, it was born from television. In 2018, Discovery Channel proposed putting them back together on camera for the first time in almost a decade. But it wasn't to talk or to heal, it was to rebuild the Yankees-themed chopper they had originally created back in 2005. That bike had been sold, then mysteriously destroyed. Some whispered it might have been damaged for insurance, though nothing was proven. For the network, it was the perfect hook. Fix the wrecked bike, fix the relationship. Behind the scenes, it was anything but friendly. The production team had to create separate shooting schedules, strict rules, and even backup plans in case the arguments got too intense. Senior tried to play it cool in interviews, saying they were a little older and a little wiser, but everyone on set could feel the tension. 2 years later, they tried again with a 2-hour special called The Last Ride. The idea was noble, a patriotic bike for ABC Supply, symbolizing family and respect. But from the first meeting, the old patterns were back. Senior brushed off Junior's ideas, just like the old days. Crew members could feel the chill in the air. Ironically, the backdrop to this family project was the demolition of the original Orange County Chopper's shop. As the walls came down, so did any pretense that this was a warm reunion. When the bike was finally finished, Senior admitted on camera that he hadn't wanted to do it at all. "It didn't help our relationship," he said flatly. Fans watching were furious. Hashtags like #RespectPaulia trended as viewers called out Senior's coldness. By 2025, Junior confirmed what fans had suspected. He and his father hadn't shared a holiday meal in over 15 years. Not even after Hudson was born. They worked together only when production contracts required it, and even then, it was strictly business. Junior had built Paul Jr. Designs into a $14 million brand. Senior still ran Orange County Choppers. They existed in the same industry, sometimes even on the same screen, but in completely separate worlds. And now, for the first time, Junior was ready to tell the whole story, uncut, unpolished, and raw. Because his next move wasn't a bike, it was a book. Teen conclusion and reflection. By early 2025, Paul Jr. had accomplished something few thought possible. He'd survived one of reality TV's most public family implosions, built his own company into a multi-million-dollar brand, and carved out an identity that was no longer Paul Shah, but Paul Jr., designer and innovator. And yet, the shadow of that family war still followed him. In February 2025, he announced his next big project, not a bike, but a memoir titled Given the Opportunity, set for release in October. But this wasn't going to be a glossy, PR-friendly coffee table book. According to insiders, it would be raw, unfiltered, and brutally honest. It would tell the stories that never made it past the editing room on American Chopper, the fights that went beyond shouting matches, the 2008 blow-up that nearly turned physical, and the emotional fallout of working under the constant glare of cameras. For the first time, Junior would open up about his father's battles with alcoholism and the deep, lasting damage it did to their family. He wasn't sharing it to settle scores. He was sharing it because he knew he wasn't the only one who had lived through it. If speaking openly about the pain, the mistakes, and the lessons could help someone else survive their own family battles, then it was worth the risk. From sweeping floors at age 12 to becoming one of the most recognizable custom bike builders in the world, Paul Jr.'s story isn't just about motorcycles. It's about resilience, reinvention, and the cost of chasing a dream when the person you're chasing it with is also the person you're fighting against. Fame gave them a platform. Television made them legends. But the very thing that brought them together, the shop, the bikes, the shared vision, was also what tore them apart. Now, the question isn't whether they'll ever work together again. It's whether the truth, once it's out in the open, can heal wounds that 15 years of silence couldn't. And maybe, just maybe, the next chapter for Paul Jr. won't be written in steel and chrome, but in the hope that some bonds can be reforged, even after the metal has cooled.